Okay, guys, welcome back to Inksmith. First of all, thank you so much for all the new subscribers. I was hoping for 100 subscribers, and you've outdone that. The likes, the comments, the interactions, dude, I am so stoked and loving this, and I'm loving having all of your inputs and comments and suggestions. This is great, and I hope today I satisfy another niche of the sort of comic book drawing illustration community by diving into kind of a heavy topic: why Eastern comics are destroying their Western counterparts. So, for example, Japanese manga and anime, South Korean and Chinese manhwa, aka webtoons and webcomics. I don't know if you guys keep up with the market or anything like that. I'm not super concentrated on what sales look like, but I do know one thing. Kimetsu no Yaiba, or aka Demon Slayer, as I believe it's called in the West, destroyed DC and Marvel Comics in 2020. The amount that they outsold, I believe, I don't have the total numbers of this, but from what I've heard, just the manga alone outsold all of DC and Marvel combined, compared to any comic book series that they sold. So that's just one, that is one manga series from within Japan destroying two massive companies. And do note that DC and Marvel, the movie studios, are not included in those. Those obviously sell quite a bit and are usually never entered into the actual comic sales. Anyway, enough blabbing. Let's jump into it. I've got 10 points here to go over. Number one, creating a new setting, new races outside the confines of Earth and humans. This completely removes artists from the debates of liberals and conservatives. It removes any race debates, sexist debates, feminism debates. It destroys all this. It also deals with things outside of countries or cultures or traditions. This is how a lot of Japanese comics avoid this completely. I am not really too sure why. I guess it's just kind of a tradition, but a lot of our Western comics love to base everything on Earth. I guess they feel like that's easier to relate to if we set things within America and talk about all kinds of political problems going on and involve our comic book characters with those. And I think this is something that worked out really well for like the 1950s and World War II, back when comics were, having Superman punch Hitler to the moon and stuff like that. Maybe that really worked out, but times have seriously changed, and I'm not sure why we're still adding a political commentary to our Western comics. If you want to know me personally, I'm liberal. I would say I'm very left-leaning, and I'm all for, LGBTQ, Black Lives Matter, all that stuff. Everybody is allowed to have their speech. I also feel like all conservatives should have their speech too. But why we should combine any of these into comic books, I do not know. I don't get it. Okay, so let's give an example here. I keep saying how Japan does this. Hoseki no Kuni, Land of the Lustrous. If you haven't heard of this comic series, it's non-gender binary diamond people, or precious rock people made out of gems and diamonds and all kinds of different stuff. They exist on a fantasy planet and fight fantasy wars. There's no way you could ever call this racist or sexist. No one's going to be like, this is primitive against the way it treats women as they shatter into diamond pieces. You're never hearing anybody speak about this because they've removed it so far from anything we can conceive within this world. And it's so imaginative and so great and so engrossing with the way their own rules work that we don't bring anything political to mind. We don't bring any kind of argument to mind. We're just enjoying the story of these gem people. And why Western comics haven't evolved to do this yet, I still do not know. Number two, women having power in comics. I remember looking at a panel recently where it was a really bad drawing of Supergirl telling another woman she can delete all the stupid boys from her cell phone. She doesn't need men to be powerful. And while that might be a great message, be your own person and be your own strength, I'm not sure why they think this makes a powerful female character that other females would want to follow. Women having power in comics in Marvel involves things like I Am Not Starfire, which is a comic about an angry goth girl not wanting to be like her popular mom. Or if you want to get into something even worse, The New Warriors with Warpath, a Native American obese girl with a backpack that she can pull anything out of. I don't know how women would look at these characters and think like, damn, I wish I was a woman who could pull anything out of a backpack. Meanwhile, in Japan, we've got comics with actual epic women characters. For example, Chainsaw Man's boss is the most boss girl ever. She's like the most powerful demon and controls everything. Well, actually, I guess she's sort of an angel, if I'm correct, and she's mind controlling all these men who follow her like nonstop, and her entire arc throughout the comics is just brilliant. And no one says like, wow, this really empowers women. They just see a great character. And this creates something that people can look up to. Let's take the comic book I just talked about, Kimetsu no Yaiba or Demon Slayer. Nezuko is a girl who doesn't even have to speak through the entirety, and she fights like a beast, like literally like a beast, like she is half demon and kicks everybody's ass. And if you want to talk about one that does talk, there's Mitsuri, a badass, samurai who's trained in a school full of like the top level samurai. So, and they don't call attention to the fact like, oh my God, I can't believe a girl can wield a sword like this. She's just as powerful as the men and the characters that fight alongside her. No one sees any difference between how powerful the girl or the guy is within these comics. And that's how they create really strong female leads. They don't call attention to it. They don't try to say, look at her strength, look at how powerful she is compared to the man. They don't ever make it comparative. They just say, all of these people are equally brutally strong. Isn't that awesome? Number 3, getting into the LGBTQ plus community. Oh God, is it ever heavy-handed the way Western comics handle it? I think one of the most notable ways is recently Clark Kent, Superman, his son has come out as bi, and he literally shows off his boyfriend to everybody in the comic book. Like he's literally like picking him up and carrying him around saying, look, this is my new boyfriend, this K-pop looking guy. Japan has covered this for so long, going, even back to the 80s. They just had a series called Boy Love. Boy Love is just LGBTQ, and there's, the female version of that too, covering these kind of topics as a side thought. We already know the characters are gay in these comic books, but they put them in horror stories, thrillers, sci-fis, actions. I remember one I read just recently. It was called Bastard, and it was about a guy whose dad is a serial killer who forces him to help him hide the bodies as he kills people. Oh, and also he's gay on the side. But they don't make that the main point of the story. We just already know that by his relations that we watch. A lot is already communicated just by the drawings and illustrations. You don't need to force it on the story. Number 4, quality over free speech. A great artist can draw and show everything and say so much with a quality story and a high level of art than an artist purely driven by politics, a mediocre skill, and a storyline that forces itself to virtue signal. This is so obvious. There's so many political aspects you could get out of a recent anime like the Mugen Train movie for Kimetsu no Yaiba and Demon Slayer, sorry, I keep calling it by its Japanese name, but I mean, there's like the power of friendship. There's so much going on there. There's strong female leads, and it's an amazing movie with just absolutely incredible art. And then what do we got for a so-called anime in America now? It's what High Guardian Spice was their way of kind of pushing these same things. And I mean, I think we can all agree on the quality of that being no quality at all. Now, one big thing I have heard, and this gets into topic number 5, female fan shots are a complaint against a lot of Japanese comic books and anime. A girl climbs a ladder, and the guy below her starts to climb it too, and there's a panty shot suddenly. Yeah, okay. They exploit the body of females sometimes. And guess what? They also exploit the bodies of men just as much in Japanese comics. How many comics have you read, or manga have you read, or anime have you seen where the girl walks into the guy changing his clothes? Where, if you read any boy love comic series, manga series, it gets explicit, like very, very explicit. Everything is shown. So a lot of women in Japan read those boy love comics, and they read it for the same reasons guys might read a comic that shows off females. So both are exploited equally. Neither side complains here in Japan. Number 6, races and cultures are left nebulous. And this means no one is left to the wayside because we are in a world with fantasy problems. They still tell stories. They still tell about rejection and loss of status and power, a modern feudalism that exists between financial stability and classes. For example, Doro Hedoro, a story about the different divide in classes with people who live in the wizarding world and people who live back on the destroyed streets of Neo-Tokyo. We see a clear class divide in how people are treated, those who don't know magic and those who do. But you don't see a lot of picketing or rioting over lizard-headed people and wizards in the real world. So it never becomes a tangible, contentious problem that people argue that certain aspects of life are not represented properly within these storylines. Number 7, incredibly strong female characters. Okay, so once again, I always hear people complain that there's not enough comics about female characters, but I hear the other side saying, well, we would follow any female character that had a great storyline. Now, I think there's sometimes in the West where you can see this. For example, Tomb Raider is a great example of a strong female character whose story you want to learn. But within Japan, this is just, it's been done since the beginning of manga and anime. Even the ones I just mentioned, there's a strong female character in Doro Hedoro, a female gyoza chef, and then also even a bad guy female with a thick bodybuilder bounty hunter female. Those are the types of representation that are equal to the manly representation in those. And that's why no one looks at this and thinks, oh, everybody's a man in this, everybody's a white man. There's a Japanese woman and then some kind of burly, I don't even know if she has a race, the giant bounty hunter woman. And they're just seen as characters. They're not seen by their gender or anything like that. 8, what this means, what all this means. Japanese art has been progressive for ages. That's what this means. Japanese art never had any limits on it. Now, this is kind of a crutch that affected, I think, Western comics from the early 1950s, 1960s into the 80s. And they had the comic code. Now, a lot of people don't know a lot about this because it's such a ridiculous code that if you read some of the rules it had, they were just insane. It was like, no one can commit violence against another person who isn't already seen as a criminal. Like these really specific rules that were supposed to be in every comic ever produced. And these did limit Westerners quite a bit. I'm not making any excuse that, hey, they could have still told a great story with all this comic code stuff going on. No, they couldn't have. It's impossible. The comic code limited them way too much, and I feel bad for that. I feel like a lot of probably great storytellers were limited back in the 1980s, the 1990s even, when this code still existed and was still enforced. Now, that code is gone. Nobody has to follow that anymore. There's no more comic code. If you look at the comic books that are released within America, DC, and Marvel, there is no more under the comic code seal. But what happened was Westerners overcompensated by getting people like Tumblr and zealots on Twitter to now write their comics and use them as a political speaking point, whereas Japan has slowly been making points like this and suggesting these points through their art and great storytelling, yet in subtle ways over decades now. So what we're seeing now is kind of an overcompensation where the entire comic book is used only to make a comic book, not just a comic book, but an actual political point and say, look at us, we've really changed. We really believe in LGBTQ rights and Black Lives Matter. And okay, that's great. That's super. We're really proud of you. Now tell us an actual story, not a virtue signal. All right, number 9. We're almost at the end here. I hope I haven't annoyed you too much. Why no one reads or likes any of the comic books that are coming out to make these points. It's because they've pretty much used the comic solely to broadcast these functions, to broadcast their virtue signals. Western comics, unfortunately, for the most part, aside from smaller indie developers like the new Spawn comics, they are the only ones who are not wasting their time trying to use their comic book form as a political podium. They're not trying to use it as a speaking point. They're still there to tell a story and draw great art. If the art gets worse because you hire bad artists who have a great political point, then the artists stop looking at the books. If the story gets worse because the entire comic just becomes a political point, your readers stop reading. And this is something the West needs to kind of figure out and correct. Now, number 10, the final point, how can Western comics get their steam back? How can they get back on the same level that Japan is at right now, or pretty much all Eastern comic books are at right now, with great storytelling, great art? Stop hiring activists to create your comic books. That's the main thing. If you look up any history of any comic book drawer or manga artist or mangaka or anime artist within Japan, there's nothing on their resume or their history about how they were protesting something, or, they may actually believe in that. That might be part of their beliefs, and they've actually learned how to tell you about that through the subtlety of their storytelling and comic book writing. But there's no implication that they are being hired because they stand for a certain political belief. And there is a lot of politics within Japanese comics. There's a lot of comic books and manga and anime that make some very strong political commentary. For example, even within Studio Ghibli, Princess Mononoke, I mean, that if you can't see the strong push for the green and eco-friendly sentiments within that giant beautiful movie, then you're completely missing the point. But the way they've done it is remove it from Earth, put it in a fantasy world, not worry about pitting one race against another. Instead, they've just used fantasies and fantasy worlds and fantasy countries while still telling you the same message. And that's because, once again, they've never been restricted. And I think that's another thing that can get us back to some great art and some great storytelling in America is don't have restrictions on where they can go with the story. Don't limit explicit content. Don't limit violence. Don't limit any kind of, sex between characters. I know that sounds risque, but Japan has never done that, okay? I do realize there's some extremes within Japan where stuff gets super, out there with ecchi and guro ecchi and stuff like that. I'm not commenting on that. That's considered a totally different classification within the porn realm within Japan. And anybody who tries to place that into streamlined manga and anime is sorely mistaken. Even within Japan, those types of manga and anime are only sold at porn shops. So no, you cannot place them into the same category as these others. So finally, I guess for comic fans out there, for those of you who've been frustrated like me with a lot of the storytelling in America, the best way you can also make your voice heard back is not by speaking out or ranting or fighting or yelling at people whose commentaries you don't believe in. The best way is just vote with your wallet. The loudest thing that will ever be heard to American companies is voting with your wallet. Don't buy these comics. You don't need to get in there and get into a fight with the creator of New Warriors, Kibble Bits, or whatever his name is. You don't need to get in there and fight with the creator of I Am Not Starfire, or diss everyone who made High Guardian Spice. You don't need to get in there and start yelling absurdities at them and curse words and telling them how much they suck. Just vote with your wallet. cancel your subscription to these ones that use your money to support crap like High Guardian Spice. Talk with your wallet. Your wallet speaks louder than anything you could ever type on Twitter. It is our best form of taking a stand for what we believe should be really bought and sold within Western comics. Great art and great stories. I hope I made my point pretty clear. I think I did. Once again, I'm not saying I'm against any of these things being spoken about. And I feel like there is a great place and a great time to speak about these things. And I'm not even against, very left-leaning, feminists or liberals or anybody talking about their rights and what they want to see changed on Twitter or anything. That's fine. I don't care. Same with conservatives too. I don't even think any conservatives should have been knocked off of Twitter because Twitter didn't agree with them and was too heavy left-leaning themselves. I think that's BS too. But what I don't think is any of this stuff should be inserted into comic book drawing, and I think manga and anime has shown how this is true. If you agree, if you don't agree, that's okay. I would just love to hear your comments down below. Once again, thank you so much for 100 plus subscribers. I hope I've scratched an itch today with what I've covered. If there's something you'd like to see me cover in a future video, once again, let me know. I've been the Inksmith, and I hope you have a wonderful day.